you cannot imagine, times like we've seen in last 2 years, that, you just enclosed within a space and expect all segments of people to work. So with the onset of hybrid, it is actually mandated in an employee's mind that, we can enjoy the office banter as well at some point in time, while we can also work in closed closets when it is required. So a balance of both is actually, today what is needed. Piyush, how do you gauge employee sentiments when interactions are mostly digital? See, that is a very innate point, because even when you're hiring a person from a segment that has an X number of sentiments or an X number of capabilities, but then how well or how easy it is for you to gauge a differentiation between between one employee or the another, and how do you think, on what basis do you think that, digitally you have to hire this person?
Yeah, so look, Sugandh, I think there are two parts to this, right? One part is gauging sentiments informally, and the other is gauging sentiments formally as an organization of scale.
Right.
Okay. Now, informally, again, let's step back. Okay. Even in a 100% work from office environment, there were some people who were great at gauging employee sentiment, and there were some people who were not so great. That variation existed even earlier, because, think about it, sir. There are people who are intuitively great people managers, and there are people who are not great people managers. Similarly, in an informal way of gauging employee sentiment, some supervisors will be able to figure it out immediately. You don't need a real-time interaction to be able to figure it out, right? Other supervisors may not be able to do it so well. Now, the only difference in this case is that moving from a real environment to a virtual environment, it becomes slightly more difficult. Okay, the informal. So that's one. The second thing, however, which is more important, is as an organization, it becomes very important to be able to formally gauge employee sentiment and do it at scale. So, we've put in place what we have is a real-time employee sentiment measurement tool, and it's actually it is an AI chatbot. It's an AI-driven chatbot. It's called Amber, which actually reaches out to employees real time to get their feedback. Now, the reason I say that it's built on AI is that the chatbot has the intelligence to ask a set of questions, and then it learns from the responses it gets. And therefore, over a period of time, as it has learned from those responses, based on the answers it gets, the next set of questions is not necessarily the same for two employees. So the chatbot is learning as it's going along.
Okay.
Now, as opposed to paper pencil engagement surveys that used to happen, or one-time engagement surveys that used to happen online, this is now gauging employee sentiment real time. Every employee responds to or is sent an interaction request by Amber at least once a quarter. So we have had, I would say, this year already probably in the range of 200,000 conversations across 100,000 employees in the first half of the year. And Amber is able to then give us feedback on every node and every cohort in the organization, as to what is the mood score, what's the engagement score, what are their top concerns, etc., etc. So you're able to then use that data, slice and dice it for analytics and engagement and attrition and all of those interesting things. So another great learning coming out of the pandemic, because we've driven this chatbot to scale. It's driven by AI. It's real-time feedback. It's allowed us to marry that feedback with a bunch of other data sources to be able to arrive at intelligent decisions for our employees.
Piyush, as much as I agree with the statement that, onset of technology has boomed, industries across, do you think it has laid a huge amount of impact onto the hiring industry as well as on the feedback mechanism from employees?
Explain that a little more. I'm not
In
sure
a
I
way that, you said that, now that within this time frame and that you've introduced Amber, you've had over, X number of conversations from your employee base. Okay.
right.
But do you think that, you were not able to live up to the expectations or get into a conversation with each of your employees prior to bringing out Amber? In
No,
the name of proximity of conversation.
no. I would approach it slightly differently, Sugandh. I would approach it with, you know, we are constantly evolving and learning as an organization,
Right.
and hopefully as individuals as well, right? Now, when that is happening, you have other tools and processes in place. A crisis represents an opportunity to bring in something different, and circumstances dictate that you bring in something different, and many times it's a huge innovation and gives you massive returns to scale. So my point is not that a lot of this stuff wasn't happening earlier. My point is that the opportunity that arose gave us an opportunity to innovate like crazy and has given us fantastic outcomes. So my point was not at all that these things weren't happening earlier. They were happening in a different way. The context today has changed, and therefore they need to happen in a different way because of the changed context.
So hybrid way has actually helped you innovate more and in a more structured manner.
It has helped us. See, here's what has happened.
Hmm.
The shift between working from office and working in a hybrid environment was more dramatic than most other shifts that have happened in the past.
Fair enough.
It was more compressed in time than other shifts that happened more gradually. Okay.
Right.
It was also more drastic in the sense that there was no choice available. Right. It was also pretty much global at the same time.
Okay.
Right. Now that enabled many things to happen. It became a catalyst for many things to happen. So, it became a catalyst for adopting technology. There was no choice, right? How many Zoom meetings are you doing a week now versus before the pandemic, right? It was because you didn't have a choice during the pandemic.
Right.
So the circumstances were dictating adoption of video conference facilities. Circumstances were dictating adoption of employee engagement tools which can be real time and give you insights. Okay. Circumstances were dictating the use of training platforms which are virtual as opposed to classroom. Right. Circumstances were dictating that collaboration happen in virtual ways rather than in labs where people could be together.
Right. No, certainly there has been, a lot of experimentation that has gone in this period, and but there are very few organizations that say that they've succeeded onto innovating, or they've successfully adapted the exact role of technology that they should have few years back, or few generations back. But there is one thing that's constant prior to pandemic, during pandemic, and after pandemic, which is talent war. Now, given the ongoing talent war, what is prospectively your organization or Genpact strategy going forward to acquire and retain future ready talent? It is actually the need of the hour. While I talk to many CHROs, they say that, now our prime focus, has been, yes, we've adopted hybrid way of work very intelligently, but we need to retain the talent as well. They are getting myriad of options. They're getting myriad of different competencies within the organization. How do you plan on retaining that talent?
You're 100% right. Talent retention has become a big challenge, especially in the last 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, where the
Uh,
great resignation has been on the loop again and again.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So I definitely think that's happened. Now, partly that was also driven by the macroeconomic environment, okay, where companies were being funded very differently from what they're likely to be funded. Uh, you know, Money flowing into the system. I think we are going to see, I mean, it's no secret that it is anticipated that the impact of inflation is now going to hit, and, recession associated with that, etc., etc.
right.
All of that, I think, is going to lead to a more muted behavior than what we've been seeing in the last 6 to 9 months on,
Right.
hiring sprees, attrition, compensation spirals, etc., etc., which pretty much all of us believed was unsustainable, and it was a matter of time. So first, that context, which isn't exactly answering your question. Now, to go to your question, there is still competition for talent, and it's going to be hard. In our view, future ready talent is an interesting concept. In some ways, it's an oxymoron, because the future is going to change so fast that you will not have talent which is by definition ready for future. Our hypothesis to this is that the most important trait talent needs to have is the ability to learn and the ability to unlearn, because the half-life of most skills is 2 to 3 years. Okay.
Very true.
That skill itself is going to change. So now if people are wedded to a particular skill and they're not able to unlearn that and learn something else, then by definition, they are not quote unquote future ready. So in my view, the only relevant part of future ready is learnability. Okay, so that's number one. And being able to help people with that is very important. So now, look, I mean, even in this environment, hybrid environment, Sugandh, I don't think the fundamental thesis of what people are looking for has changed. Okay. And it's very important not to complicate that in our view. What does an individual who come to work look for, by and large, if you were to generalize? Excuse me. They want to work for a company which has purpose.
Very true.
That was the case earlier as well. It's only now that people have become to articulate fancy purposes and all of that. At the end of the day, people, definitely got value out of working for an organization that was making a difference to the communities and the stakeholders it served, right? And the clients. So purpose was always important. So it starts with my company.
Okay.
My company includes the purpose, it includes the leaders, and it includes the manager. They were always important and they will continue to be important.
Very true.
There'll be my career. Okay. What is the job that I'm doing here? What is the job that I'm doing here? And where will I grow from here? What will I learn? Right?
Right.
And my rewards. How do I get rewarded for it? Both in terms of money and otherwise, right? In my view, these three things, or four, if you include my manager as a separate one, are the four most important pillars, and they continue to remain the most important pillar. Now, I'm very happy to argue with anyone who says that wasn't the case 10 years back.
No, it was certainly the case. But today I feel there is one more factor that has added. As an employee, what you look in for while you go or get hired by an organization is what is the work-life balance that you get. That has certainly been the new ask that I've seen post-pandemic or during pandemic, because there is no clock in, clock out is what employees say.
I fully agree with you. When I talk about my rewards, that's one of the things I'm talking about, right? But the reality is that it's one of the factors. At the end of the day, if you ask me, is it my career? Is it my manager? Is it my company, or is it work-life balance that's more important? I can tell you with a reasonable amount of conviction that for a larger number of people, it's going to be the other things that are more important. So be that as it may, look, I think the bigger point here is those were important issues 3 years back as well.
True.
Before the pandemic.
Right.
Even work-life balance was. Now the question is the means with which we satisfy these needs of employees are changing. They're getting enabled much better by technology. They're getting enabled much better by refinement in the thinking and progress in the thinking around these tools, right? The needs that they're addressing remain the same.
No, very much the same, because if somebody says that, these were not the points, or these were not the asks of employees prior to pandemic, is something that, we're not, I mean, I as an employee also would not agree to it, because one always wants to work for a company that has purpose, that gives you, good mileage, that gives you good growth. And certainly, work-life balance was also the ask. But see, you're right that, work-life balance for employees today is still a secondary aspect, but it has become important since the time, we've hit pandemic, because in offices, we have this spectrum in mind that, we're going to log in at 9, we're going to leave office at 7, we're leaving our workstations there. But while we're working from home and we have these laptops 24/7 with us, we are not able to leave work. Hence, I feel that, the onset of work-life balance within, employees as a new ask, it has become a trend, has become more of a trend actually these days, because they're
Yeah,
not
so
able
Sugandh,
to, manage how to and why to. Actually, there is no clock in, clock out is what I see within, my colleagues as well.
yeah, so Sugandh, first, look, I'm not, I'm not for a moment suggesting that it's not a trend. In
Right.
fact, I'm suggesting that it's a trend. But how meaningful a trend is it compared to some of the other more basic needs of them? So for example, mental well-being is a massive trend.
Right.
It's arisen in a really, really big way after the pandemic or through the pandemic, right? In a proportion that didn't exist before. And for people for whom it's relevant, it's a massive issue. I'm not
Right.
for a moment suggesting that these don't exist or these are not trends. I'm saying fundamentally, however, if you step back to the 4 basic factors and you can solve for that, you have
Right.
80% of the problem addressed.
Very true. No, I completely agree with you, Piyush. And, I am also agreeing to the fact that you said, yes, it's a trend. Post-pandemic, yes, it's a huge trend. So more or less, holistically, we've discussed this topic to an extent. If, as a viewer, if you would want 5 key takeaways from you, what would that be from our conversation, Piyush?
Look, I think the biggest takeaway is, first of all, I think all of us must consider ourselves hugely fortunate to be where we are today. Hopefully healthy, hopefully well, and I think a lot of people I interact with feel like they're blessed and feel thankful for that in a way that we did not feel earlier. Okay, so I think for me that's a huge personal takeaway. Okay, and built on that, therefore, is my personal learning that do not take the most basic things that you have for granted, even for a minute. Take a minute to sit back, take a moment to sit back every now and then and be thankful and revel in that opportunity, because that's what we've learned in the past, right? With the recent past. So that's on the personal. On the corporate front, I think it is pretty clear that the world is going to be very different. Our work environments are going to be very different. Our client asks are going to be very different. Our stakeholder asks, including employees, are going to be very different. I continue to maintain, however, that the basics of what our employees are looking for have not changed. The ways for delivering to those basics have changed. And we must embrace technology, we must embrace data, we must embrace analytics in being able to solve for those along with process. However, we must not become servants of that technology or that data or that analytics, or we must resist the tendency to go after flavor of the week or flavor of the month type topics. There's one thing that I believe in very strongly as a part of my 30 years of being in the function, is that the ability of great talent managers and people managers and business managers is they're able to figure out the trends that matter and the trends that are flavor of the week or the flavor of the month. And more often than not, they get it right. And what that means, therefore, is that you get more resources to be focused and to be able to sustain and to be able to invest and to be able to nurture in a quality way rather than spreading your thought process and all the resources you have far too thin. So those are some of the learnings. And then finally, learnability and learning agility is king, queen, everything that you can think of. People who can learn and people who can learn fast and people who have the humility and the desire and the energy to be able to learn fast and then to unlearn and then learn again will be the people who will be the leaders of the future.
That's, very valid points that you've thrown out of this conversation. And, people who will be hearing it, I'm sure they'll be making a note of it. It has been a pleasure talking to you, Piyush. Thank you so much for the valuable insights and the knowledgeable insights that you've shared with us. Indeed, people who are there to hear you, who, they must have seen something from your past experiences. They must have learned something, that the examples and the anecdotes that you've quoted are, something to learn from. And it's been a pleasure, Piyush, having on board and talking to you about this, very enthralling topic that we hear on a daily basis, but you've broken it into parts and into points that, as a reader or as a viewer, I'll always keep in mind. So thank you so much, Piyush.
Thank you, Sugandh. Wonderful spending time with you and, great discussion. Really enjoyed it. So appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much, Piyush. Thank you.